So I'm going to review the norms, which are start and end on time, be respectful, and agree to disagree. And I'll keep things moving according to the schedule. So the first thing that's going to happen is Stephanie is going to set the context for her lesson and describe the lesson being taught, including the age level and grade of students, what part of the day the lesson took place, unusual facts that occurred that day, what the lesson that was videotaped was on, what the lessons before and after were on, and how it connects with the course of study.
So this is a 8th grade science class. We're in the Populations and Ecosystems unit. Students are 14 years old. It was done in a 2-part, so the lesson is broken up into 2 parts. So I filmed a little bit in the first class, which was second period, 9:30 to 10:20. Then they had a break and they came back, and I filmed again from 11:30 to 12:20, just the way that it was broken up in testing. And the students were asked basically to select an organism if removed from an ecosystem would have the greatest impact on that ecosystem. They had been, prior to this, they had worked on, as a class whole, Mono Lake, and they had done altogether work on that ecosystem and learning about food webs and making the connections and discussing how organisms were added or removed. From that point, I broke them up into groups, and I gave them, there's additional ecosystems in the system. So they all had a different one, like Monongahela, Alaska, and they broke into groups, and they worked on a completely different ecosystem, and they had to, again, work on a web, ask themselves similar questions. What if an organism was removed, and what if one was added? And they had to actually create a poster and report to the class. So they actually presented their poster, they worked on it for probably a few days, maybe 3 or 4 days, and they presented the poster to the class, talked about the abiotic factors, biotic factors, and then talked about the web and the organisms within it. And then from that point, I asked them, with their final question in that group, in a large group, was, in that particular ecosystem, if one was removed from there, what would have the greatest impact and why? So they had to present that. So that's kind of how I started everything. I said, okay, now you've had that opportunity to do that for this ecosystem, but everybody had a different ecosystem, so we can't have a group conversation, we can't have a whole conversation. So we're going to do this again, and you're going to work individually. So leading up to this one, I gave them a whole new ecosystem again, the life in the pond, and they had to, by themselves quietly, work on creating a food web, answering some questions about the ecosystem, about the impact organisms had when it was added, and then they had to answer that question again. Which organism, if removed from the ecosystem, would have the greatest impact? In that time, I gave them the form to fill out that was more structured. I explained to them about claim, evidence, reasoning, and they filled out a form that stated the claim, and they had to justify, they had to choose evidence from their food web and from their documentation, and then have justification for that. From that point, the kids were then paired. I tried to pair them into groups that all had the same answer, although there were some that had different answers, so I kind of infused them in groups or grouped them together, and gave them an opportunity to have that discussion to come up with a like response. And then from that point, they were to have to share or have a scientific argument with another group about their claim and why they think it's the organism that would have the greatest impact, and then likewise listen to somebody else's and have a little back and forth about that. So.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to restate the questions from your pre-observation form that you had about your lesson.
Okay. So I wanted the observers to watch the students and see how well they were having these discussions back and forth about their claims. There was so much building up, but I didn't know how my scaffolding was. So kind of how that progression, to see if you had suggestions of different methods that would get them to where I was hoping they'd get to. Meaning when they're in there, being effectively able to have that back and forth conversation. That was kind of what I was focusing on. was how I could better promote that, where everybody was talking and listening and engaging and stuff.
Okay, since we have our Form 3s done, we'll move to warm and cool feedback. So I'll make sure that it focuses on the course of study topic and student learning. If we can just go around one at a time and give warm feedback first, and then we'll do cool feedback, and Stephanie, you're not talking.
Stephanie, I really liked the way that as the kids were getting started, I liked the way you passed out the supplies. You had the kids dispersed all over the room in their groups, and by having to pass out the supplies, you were able to make contact with each of the groups, which got them on task right away. They knew you were coming, knew you were coming back, and I thought that was a really convenient way of getting the supply job done, at the same time keeping the kids on task.
I really liked how you framed your lesson. I really liked how you explained everything in the beginning, and this was the first clip when you did the food webs. I like how you said two things. I don't know why that stuck with me, because when as a teacher you're usually going through a list, and I like how you said, okay guys, we're just going to do two things right now. And I thought that just by telling them two things, it was able to, I don't know, it's like a mindset. Like it even worked for me, like, okay, these are the two things that I want to look for in her lesson, or these are the two things that she wants the kids to make sure that they get done. And those two words, I thought, wow, okay, I need to use that, because it was really it kept the lesson in focus.
I liked the choice you had of, the question, which organism had the greatest, if it was removed, had the greatest impact on the environment. That was a great one, I think, to choose for the CER method, to apply it, because it was just, could be more than one answer that would be justified.
I thought it was really great how you got everyone's question before you talked to them. Even though I meant waiting or, looking at what the other student, you made sure that everyone was listening before you talked.
I liked the way that the kids were engaged from the beginning. When it was time for you to let them loose, they got right down to business. They knew what you were expecting, and right away, there were kids talking back and forth, there were kids that were cutting and getting ready to pace. They were just all engaged in whatever it was their group needed.
I like the cutting. I like that part. I really did. They're 8th graders, and how often do they get to cut anymore? And I feel like for some kids, they need that still. They still need to be active, and that may be one way that you keep some of the kids engaged. So I like that, because 8th grade teachers might not necessarily do that. I think it's really important in food webs, but it's something that they don't get to do that often. So I thought that was really cool that you kind of had them do it visually and made them cut out the pieces themselves.
I like how you reminded them when they were listening to the other groups, members from the other groups, that they should be taking notes. Because all of a sudden they went like, whoa, like, ooh, I need to really focus. And I thought that was just a great way of getting them to really listen to what was being said, and to really, focus in on what they were listening to. Because you could just see like a shift, and they went right into it.
Yeah, I thought that was really good too. Like, so good that I'm saying the same thing that Mary just said. But I think that a lot of times our students just want to argue, like especially, I don't know about students in other school districts, but I know like my students in Boston just want to like argue with someone. Like they want to have an out with somebody right away, and so forcing them to like listen and take notes makes them kind of like, step back and like really listen to the other person before they go off on their own opinion.
I like the fact that you had the reflective piece built right into the lesson. Not only did you want them reflecting on what they did, but you asked them to give you some written details on if they changed their mind, and what was it that changed their mind.
I really liked how you had them do the alternate claim. They were not only taking notes and listening, but they had to actually write something else down. I like that, how you had to think of two opposing views and you had it, well, you had it, I haven't seen it yet, but you had it on the piece of paper, okay, you're gonna do this, and then you're gonna do that. I liked how it was like right there for them to do.
I liked how the students had the food chains in front of them because they referred to them all the time when they were talking about their reasoning. So that they really were looking for evidence. And it was like a nice visual. If the kids weren't always listening verbally to what they were saying orally, they were listening and making the connection and they were pointing. And I thought that was really helpful.
Just a general comment that I said at 24 minutes. It looked like the one group of students, the camera was focused on, were having like a really heated discussion, and it was evident that they were very engaged in what they were talking about.
I like the fact that students were working independently, and yet you were within arm's reach, and you seemed to be everywhere. All of, you know, you checked in with everybody repeatedly.
From a classroom management standpoint, I thought the clapping was awesome.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
I never thought, you know, I mean, it was just a great way to not use your voice, to get them back to task. And I think it's something elementary teachers use, but I never thought to use it. I thought it was very effective.
And again, Jen touched on this too. They were required to listen quietly, kind of like what we're doing when we're doing the debriefing, and you know, and be respectful while other people express their claims, evidence, and reasoning. And I think it allowed the person talking to complete their thought process, as opposed to having somebody jump in and say but, and then trying to come back with something like they could think the whole idea through, and then questions. I thought that was really helpful.
I thought they did a really good job of like checking in and telling them, checking in with the groups. You gave them time checks, you gave them goals to finish. You like cued them in, you reminded them that paper is the most important part. You reminded them to use the food web they made as evidence. So like you were very aware of what was going on and what groups kind of needed reminders about.
That's it.
I think we already mentioned that the goals were discussed at the beginning, and the lesson, and then followed through all the way through to the end. And checked in.
So that's all I need to deal with that. Did you have anything else to say?
Oh, I like the templates everybody used.
Okay, so we'll move on to pool feedback.
I don't have a lot of cool feedback. I really liked the lesson. It would have been nice to have the video include when they were putting out on their posters. You know, but you can't fit everything into a single class period.
And you already mentioned why you used life in the pond. But my cool feedback was maybe use mix up the ecosystems, give them different ones per group. But I understand why you did the one that you did. So it's really not cool feedback.
Okay, so I was talking about the poster piece so you could see it visually, but you did that eventually. The only thing was that you said that you weren't going to, you didn't have, I'm not sure about the decomposer part, or why that wasn't in there. Did you feel like that just added a level of?
She can't
That's
respond.
right.
You can ask
I got that
next.
included. You know, was that a conscious choice? Was that too many things in the mix there? We're trying to do the CER and then explain the process and then do the concepts too. So it's just one. But I would think that might be helpful to kind of see the whole food chain or the whole food web.
I said I wish that I could have heard individual student discussions, but that was more of a problem of videotaping than with your classroom. Like, you could see that students were engaged, but I wish that I could have like heard their discussions. Yeah.
Anybody else have a question?
Any other
Move on and
feedback?
One more, and this goes kind of falls into what Maureen said earlier, what Jen just said. I would have liked to heard each group share out maybe to the class as a whole or in small groups, because I felt like that piece was missing. I couldn't hear them, so I wanted to know what they pulled away from, and whether or not they changed their mind or what.
That's exactly what I was just gonna say.
Mine's more of a question for the next time.
Anybody else? Anything else they want to share from the feedback? So for the next part, we can ask clarifying questions about the lesson, and Stephanie, you may answer during this time. I'm going to make sure that it does not go over 5 minutes.
My question, it was a pond ecosystem. Have you been able to have the kids actually look at pond water, and is that something that's an option for extending the lesson in that time?
So prior to this, they did build terrariums and aquariums, but didn't get all the organisms in, so I feel like it was a limited aquarium. And so we did talk about a little bit about a pond. We had this aquarium in there and what things were in there, but it wasn't really. We could do better. I think that would have been much better if they had maybe even a sample of pond water to look at. The aquarium was missing a lot of pieces.
I have a question, and this also goes into how I did CER too. Did you notice that the kids get, I call it CER fatigue, I think, for some of the kids, the process, especially the kids that aren't really comfortable with writing, did you find that it was hard sometimes to motivate some of the students? Because I found that towards the end it was like we were limping towards the finish line. Did you feel that way, or did you feel like your lesson was paced in a way that you didn't feel that the kids like were getting tired of doing it?
I felt, a little bit, but I felt like it was more the fact that the groups were too large.
Okay.
I felt like, and I was looking at that with one of yours, where if I had like 2 on 2, and spread out even more if I could have, because there's a volume issue in there. I feel like it would have been better, but I feel like even with 4 and 4 or 4 and 3, I felt like that did happen, but I think it was more because some of them weren't talking as much, and then they kind of tuned out a little bit.
Mhm.
So there's 22. It's not that big of a class, but I think I was thinking to spread them out, to keep them in a bigger group. But now maybe I put them in the hallway next time, move them out even further apart so they can have more of a quiet conversation, because that was a constant battle. I thought was, okay, this is great discussion, but lower it a little bit, because and I still had them on clear opposite sides of the room, but my room's probably smaller than this, so it was not great, but.
It's interesting that you comment on the noise level. I didn't see that as an issue
really?
in the video. The noise, there's a certain amount of noise that gets generated by good learning.
Right, I think that was more what I thought.
And that's the noise
Yeah.
I heard.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. I think it didn't have anything to do with what the kids were doing. Like, I think they were fine. They were talking, seemed like in a normal voice for a classroom. But it's just that there's so many.
That it's hard
And
for
then,
yeah.
then you can't distinguish their
Yeah.
voices from each other.
Right.
And
Like you
sometimes
were
it's the
saying.
room that just you lose the sound.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? I wonder I think you actually already answered this, how students chose their original idea. They just did it independently?
Yes.
So they could have chosen any of the organisms in the whole, right? And then it happened that
Well, that was what I did predict. So it happened that, yes, there were several people that chose aquatic plants, so I had two groups